Welcome to Where History Roams, where we chart the course of history, one story at a time. I'm your host, Cab Bell, a grad student at the Citadel Military College. We're bringing you ground-level intelligence from the historical sites that we journey to and conducting interviews with those who hold the keys to the past. Join the mission and hit that subscribe button and get ready for the journey. Today we're in Higginsville, Missouri at the Missouri Confederate Memorial State Historical Site. It was conceived as a place of refuge and residence for the Confederate veterans, their spouses, and minor children. It ran from 1891 to 1950 when the last veteran, John T. Graves, died at the age of 108. His headstone simply says, John T. Graves, last of Shelby's men. It became a Missouri state park, and after that they maintained the Confederate Cemetery, a national cemetery, a chapel, a cottage, a farmhouse, and one of the old hospitals. This cemetery contains 723 graves. In June of 1906, the United Daughters of the Confederacy erected the large granite monument that dominates the cemetery. The statue was inspired by the Lion of Lucerne statue in Lucerne, Switzerland, which commemorates the Swiss guards that were masqueraded by a mob while protecting the French King Louis XV during the French Revolution. Now, let's just go up here and see this guy. You can see where he's mortally wounded, but is proud and defiant as an example of the symbol of the Confederacy. The lion's paw rests upon the seal of the Confederacy, which features a mounted George Washington surrounded by a wreath of agriculture products vital to the South. It costs $5,000, weighs approximately 50 tons, and it stands 18 feet tall. And while you can see he is mortally wounded right there in his back, the sign says, Lord God of hosts, be with us, yet lest we forget. And that is very important because there are a lot of people that do not want any kind of Confederate memorials or monuments, and they want us to get rid of them. But we cannot forget. We cannot erase history. The cemetery is sacred, so this really wasn't about the Civil War. It was really about taking care of human beings who couldn't take care of themselves, and these people happened to be Confederate soldiers. They didn't have any pensions. Union soldiers got pensions, but the Southern soldiers could not. They could not support themselves or their families, and some of them were wounded, and while they were on the losing side, they are still human beings that need to be cared for. And I believe that this site is important for that reason, and that reason only. Notice that a lot of the soldiers' graves were marked by company. And while some records might include company information, the most common markings on Civil War graves are simple 6x6-inch stones, names, ranks, and unit information for those that can be identified. Many Civil War graves were initially marked with temporarily wooden headboards that have since decayed, leaving many unmarked or with only field stones. But I want to talk about one really interesting fella, and his name is James Cummins. Cummins was a member of the Jesse James group. He was involved in the train robberies at Winston and Blue Cup, Missouri, and he lived near Kearney, Missouri, and was known as a horse thief. And he rode with Quantrell, most often with Quantrell's lieutenant, Bloody Bill Anderson, and he may have also been involved in the plot to kill Jesse James, because his sister married Robert Ford, who did kill Jesse James, who was one of Shelby's men, Quantrell. 5 of William Clark Quantrell's bones, along with the lock of his hair, are buried here, but his skull is buried in Ohio. Now, William Quantrell was the leader of a violent group of Confederate guerrillas known as the Quantrell's Raiders. Those members included Brother Frank and Jesse James and Bloody Bill Anderson. Quantrell was responsible for the massacre of Lawrence that took place on August 21st, 1863, killing 150 unarmed men and boys. Quantrell, who had been shot during a skirmish in Louisville, Kentucky, died on June 6, 1865, and he was buried in St. John's Cemetery in Louisville. Some 20 years later, the disbursement of his bones began in 1887. Quantrell's mother arrived in the company of her son's boyfriend, William W. Scott. They requested to take the remains back to Dover, but they were refused. However, it was agreed that the grave would be dug up and the contents viewed. Scott took the skull to Miss Quantrell, who identified it based on a chipped tooth. Under darkness, the entire box was stolen. Scott delivered the box to Quantrell's mother to bury it. However, all the bones were not present and accounted for. So Scott took the skull and a few bones and tried unsuccessfully to sell them. It wasn't until 1976 when the skull of Quantrell was sent to the Historical Society and reunited with those bones, eventually one of Quantrell's arms. A lock of hair and a shin bone were donated to the Kansas Historical Society, who turned them over to the Confederate Veterans Home. They buried them on October 24th, 1992, and over 300 people attended the funeral. He is responsible for the massacre of Lawrence. Not a very likable person. He was very active in Missouri, especially in western Missouri, as there was not a large presence of Confederacy. So he helped recruit people, and one man he recruited was Bloody Bill Anderson. While he was in Kansas, they got together and they did some pretty bad stuff. But here's his grave. They were afraid that someone was going to come and dig it up. Part of his body was buried here, and so in 1992 they wrapped it in plastic, placed it inside a red plastic cooler, and put it inside a replica 19th century coffin, draped it with a Confederate flag, and poured concrete all over it so no one could dig it up. The first buildings to be constructed at the Confederate home in Missouri were small frame houses making up Cottage Row. These three-room cottages were located along both sides of the road and served as an independent living for veterans and their families. They were located on 100 by 200-foot lots, and it was common to see large vegetable gardens and fruit trees in the yards of the original cottages. Only one survives now and serves as a site administrator residence. This chapel was built at the end of the cottage row in 1892 at a cost of $1,200. In 1913, the chapel was moved to a more central location to accommodate an aging resident population of 65 years or older. It was then moved again to its present location, and this chapel is one of two remaining Confederate chapels in the United States. The other one is in Richmond, Virginia. I believe this church has been moved 3 different times. This was part of one of the hospitals that was built here in 1922, as well as the farmhouse that housed laborers and farmers. In the 1950s, the property was divided between 2 state agencies, the Higginsville Habitation Center, run by the Missouri Department of Mental Health, and the Missouri State Park Board, who maintain the historical site. When you visit historical sites, you learn and you can teach others. It's dedicated to the memory and valor of the Confederate soldiers presented by Missouri Division, United States of the Confederacy. Be sure to catch our next episode from 1861 on the Battle of Lexington. We headed up the road to check out the museum, and what do you know? The curator was right there and was willing to do an interview. We got a ton of little nuggets about the Civil War, and particularly about the Battle of Lexington, so stay tuned and check out that episode. I guarantee you're going to learn things about the Civil War that you've never heard before. And as always, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the videos.